I simply stood to pre-board, my service ribbons gleaming, when a woman's voice cut through the terminal, accusing me of stolen valor. She had no idea the man she was publicly shaming, nor the profound way our lives were already connected. The airport was a familiar kind of purgatory, a place of stale air, overpriced coffee, and the quiet, simmering tension of 100 different journeys, all crammed into one terminal. I was on my way to D.C. for a memorial service for an old friend, a brother in arms I'd lost not on the battlefield, but to the slow, relentless march of time. For the occasion, I'd worn my old service blazer. It was dark blue, sharply pressed, and on the left breast, just above the pocket, was a small, neat row of my service ribbons. Miniatures, of course. The real medals stayed in a shadow box on my mantelpiece, gathering dust and memories. I was sitting quietly, reading a paperback, when the announcement crackled over the PA system. "Good afternoon. Passengers on Flight 227 to Washington, D.C. We are now prepared for boarding. At this time, we'd like to invite our active duty military members and our veterans to pre-board." I folded the corner of my page, slipped the book into my carry-on, and stood up. My old joints protested with a familiar groan, but I straightened my back and made my way toward the gate. I was the only one who stood. A young gate agent gave me a warm, respectful smile. "Thank you for your service, sir." "Thank you for the courtesy, son," I replied, my voice a low rumble. As I stepped forward, another voice, sharp and laced with disdain, cut through the air. "Oh, honestly, you've got to be kidding me." I turned. The voice belonged to a woman in her late 40s, I'd guess. She was impeccably dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a face that looked like it had never known a moment of hardship. She was on her phone, but her cold blue eyes were fixed directly on me. "Seriously, Barbara," she said, loudly into her phone, ensuring everyone in a 10-foot radius could hear. "They let anyone claim to be a veteran these days to get on the plane first. This one's got a whole chest full of fake medals. It's probably a Halloween costume." I felt a slow burn start in my gut, an old feeling I'd worked for decades to control. I chose to ignore her, turning back to the gate agent and presenting my boarding pass. But the woman was relentless. She ended her call with a loud theatrical sigh and marched right up to the desk standing beside me. The scent of her expensive perfume was cloying. "Excuse me," she said to the gate agent, completely ignoring my presence. "I am a Platinum Medallion member. My ticket clearly states I am in Zone 1. Why is he being allowed to board before me? Is this some kind of charity thing?" The young agent looked flustered. "Ma'am, it's airline policy to pre-board members of the military." "Military?" she scoffed, finally turning her icy gaze on me. She looked me up and down, her lip curled in a sneer. "With all due respect, he looks a little old to be in the military. And those little colorful things?" She gestured dismissively at my ribbon bar. "Where did you buy those? A costume shop?" "Amazon. My son plays video games with more impressive badges than that." The burn in my stomach intensified. Each one of those ribbons told a story. They spoke of mud-caked jungles, of freezing nights in foxholes, of brothers I'd carried and brothers I'd buried. They were threads of my life, woven with sacrifice she couldn't possibly comprehend. I kept my voice even, steady. "Ma'am, I can assure you these are not from a costume shop. They were earned." Her laugh was like shattering glass. "Earned? Oh, I'm sure. Look, I don't have time for this stolen valor nonsense. Some people will do anything for a little bit of attention. It's pathetic." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow louder than her shouting. "I bet you were never even in the service. People like you just use it as an excuse." "People like me?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Her eyes flickered over my dark skin, and a nasty little smirk played on her lips. She didn't have to say another word. I knew exactly what she meant. The old familiar poison of prejudice. It was a wound I'd faced far more often than any bullet. The gate agent tried to intervene. "Ma'am, please, we need to board the plane." But she wasn't finished. She reached out, her sharp manicured nail pointing at the highest ribbon on my bar, the one with the small bronze star at its center. The Distinguished Service Cross. "This one is particularly gaudy." "What's it for?" "Best attendance." Before I could react, she did something that crossed every line. She actually poked my chest, her nail tapping against the small metal and enamel. It was a small, insignificant touch, but the violation it represented sent a jolt through me. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there, meeting her entitled gaze with the cold, hard calm I'd learned in places she would only see in her nightmares. The small crowd that had gathered was silent, watching this train wreck in slow motion. "I'm going to have to ask you to step away from this gentleman, ma'am," a new voice said. It was firm, authoritative, and cut through the tension like a hot knife through butter. We all turned. Standing there was the flight's pilot, a man with silver at his temples and captain's bars gleaming on his shoulders. He had an exasperated look on his face, clearly having been summoned by the gate agent. He looked at the woman, then at me. His eyes scanned my face, then drifted down to the ribbon bar on my blazer. And then he froze. His professional, slightly annoyed expression melted away. His eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in something that looked like awe. He strode past the woman as if she were a ghost, his eyes locked on mine. A slow wave of recognition washed over his face, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated respect. He stopped directly in front of me, and to the utter shock of everyone at the gate, snapped to a perfect position of attention, his voice cutting through the terminal's chatter like a blade. "General Davis," he said, his voice thick with reverence. I'm so sorry, sir. I had no idea you were on this flight. It's an honor." The silence that followed his words was heavier than any I'd ever experienced outside of a combat zone. You could have heard a pin drop on the industrial-grade carpet. The entitled woman's face, which had been a mask of smug superiority, was now a frozen tableau of confusion. Her jaw was slack, her perfectly painted lips slightly parted. She looked from the pilot's ramrod straight back to my face, her eyes darting back and forth as if her brain was refusing to process the input. I gave the pilot a slight nod. "At ease, Captain," I said, my voice low and calm. "No need for formalities. I'm just a passenger today." The pilot relaxed his stance but kept his respectful gaze fixed on me. "Sir, I flew C-130s in the Air Force for 20 years. I know who you are. We studied your leadership during the siege of Firebase Indigo in training. My father served under your command in the 7th Cavalry." The woman finally found her voice, though it was a strangled, disbelieving squawk. "What? Siege of... What are you talking about? You two know each other? Is this some kind of sick joke?" She turned on the pilot, her indignation returning. "Are you actually going to let this con artist get away with this?" The pilot's face hardened. He didn't even look at her, keeping his attention focused on me, as if she were nothing more than a buzzing insect. But he addressed her accusation. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now devoid of any warmth, "this man is General Michael Davis. He is a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, the Bronze Star for Valor, and 3 Purple Hearts. The ribbon you just touched," he paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "The gaudy one, as you called it, was awarded to him for actions taken on October 12, 1968, near the Cambodian border. He held off an entire enemy platoon, single-handedly, to protect the evacuation of his wounded men after his commanding officer was killed. He was 20 years old." A collective gasp went through the small crowd. Phones, which had been subtly held at people's sides, were now openly recording. The color drained from the woman's face. She looked at the small ribbon on my chest, then back at my eyes. For the first time, she wasn't seeing an old black man in a blazer. She was seeing something else, something she couldn't comprehend, and it terrified her. Her bravado crumbled into dust. I didn't," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know." "No," I said, speaking to her directly for the first time since her tirade began. "You didn't. You just assumed." The pilot stepped forward. "General, please, allow me to escort you aboard. We have your seat ready." He gestured toward the jet bridge. "There's really no need," I started to say, but he insisted. "It would be my genuine honor, sir." I nodded and picked up my carry-on. As I walked past the woman, she flinched as if I might strike her. She stood there completely alone in a sea of judgment, her expensive pantsuit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. The whispers of the other passengers were like rustling leaves as I passed. I heard snippets. Can you believe her? Disgusting. A living hero. The pilot led me onto the plane, not to my assigned seat in coach, but all the way to the front. We've taken the liberty of moving you to 1A, General. It's the least we can do. The plush leather seat was a world away from the rattling metal benches I was used to. I thanked the captain sincerely, and he left to prepare for takeoff, leaving me alone in the quiet cabin. I settled in, the soft murmur of the ventilation system, a welcome relief from the drama at the gate. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired, bone tired. The fight never really ends, I thought. It just changes uniforms. I thought of the friend I was flying to honor, and a wave of melancholy washed over me. The rest of the passengers began to board, their voices a low hum as they found their seats. The flight attendants were polite and discreet, offering me a pre-departure drink, which I politely declined. For a few blessed minutes, there was peace. I must have drifted off slightly, lost in a memory of distant thunder and the smell of rain on hot dust. A shadow fell over me. I opened my eyes. A flight attendant was standing there, looking deeply uncomfortable. Behind her, looking pale and mortified, was the woman from the gate. "I am so sorry to disturb you, sir," the flight attendant said, her voice strained. "There seems to have been a seating mix-up. This is passenger Barbara Reynolds. Her assigned seat is, well, it's 1B. I looked past the flight attendant at the woman. She stood frozen in the aisle, clutching her designer handbag to her chest like a shield. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She was going to be my seatmate for the next 2 hours. The flight attendant looked at me, her expression a silent plea for guidance. Before I could say a word, Barbara Reynolds finally looked up, her eyes swimming with a mixture of terror and something else I couldn't quite place. She took a shaky breath and spoke, her voice thin and brittle. "General," she began, her tone a world away from the mocking arrogance she'd displayed just minutes before. Can I please tell you something? It's about my son." And I looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time since the confrontation. The hard, entitled mask was gone. In its place was a raw, desperate fragility. The kind of look I'd seen on the faces of young recruits who had just realized that war wasn't a video game. The flight attendant was still hovering, uncertain what to do. I gave her a small, reassuring nod. "It's all right. Let her sit." The flight attendant retreated with a palpable sense of relief. Barbara Reynolds sank into the seat beside me, her movements stiff and awkward. She placed her expensive purse on the floor as if it were made of glass. For a long moment she just sat there, staring straight ahead at the seat back in front of her, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The final passengers were finding their seats, and the cabin door was closed with a solid thud. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming us aboard, and going through the standard pre-flight announcements. He made no mention of the incident, for which I was grateful. Through it all, the woman beside me didn't move. The engines whined to life, and the plane began its slow taxi toward the runway. Finally, as we paused at the threshold, waiting for clearance, she spoke, her voice so low I had to strain to hear it over the engine hum. "My son's name is Kevin," she said, her gaze still fixed forward. "He's 19. She swallowed hard. "He enlisted in the Marines. He leaves for Paris Island in 2 weeks. The words hung in the air between us. Suddenly, the entire ugly scene at the gate clicked into a different kind of focus. It wasn't just random malice. It was fear. A deep, primal fear that had curdled into anger and was lashing out at any target it could find. I was just the unfortunate one who happened to be standing in its path. "He worships the military," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "It's all he's ever wanted to do since he was a little boy. He has posters of soldiers on his wall. He plays those games you mentioned. He thinks it's all about honor and glory. He doesn't understand." She finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were shimmering with unshed tears. "I saw your medals, your ribbons, and all I could see was him. I saw what could happen. I see the news. I read about the veterans who come home and they're not the same. They're broken. I'm so terrified, General. I'm so terrified of what this will do to my boy, to my beautiful boy. And I've been horrible. To him. To everyone. I've been fighting with him, telling him he's throwing his life away. I've been trying to make it seem small and stupid and not worth the sacrifice. When I saw you, I just snapped. It wasn't about you. It was about him. A tear finally escaped and traced a path through her expensive foundation. She didn't bother to wipe it away. I said those awful things because I was trying to convince myself that it's all fake, that the honor isn't real, that the sacrifice isn't real. Because if it's real, then what he's doing is real, and the danger is real. And I don't think I can bear it. The plane rumbled as the engines spooled up, pressing us back into our seats. I didn't say anything. I just listened. There was nothing I could say to take her fear away. It was the most honest and ancient fear a parent can know. As the plane lifted off the ground, climbing steeply into the sky, she let out a small, quiet sob. We flew in silence for a while, the city shrinking below us into a map of twinkling lights. The flight attendants began their drink service, and we both politely refused. She had composed herself, wiping her tears away with a tissue, and restoring some semblance of her earlier poise, but the deep-seated terror remained in her eyes. "I am so deeply sorry for what I said," she said, finally, looking down at her hands, "and for what I did. There is no excuse for my behavior. I was monstrous." "You were afraid," I said simply. She looked at me surprised. "You're not angry?" "I've been a soldier for most of my life, Mrs. Reynolds," I said, my voice softening. "Anger is a heavy piece of gear to carry. You learn to put it down when you don't need it. What you're feeling, it's a mother's fear. It's a powerful thing." We talked for the rest of the flight. She told me about Kevin, how he was a good kid, a bit reckless, but with a heart of gold. She told me how proud his father was, and how that made her feel even more alone in her fear. I found myself telling her stories, not the ones of horror and bloodshed, but of the camaraderie, of the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of shared hardship. I told her about the friend I was flying to see buried, a man who had pulled me out of a burning Huey and had been my best friend for 50 years afterward. I tried to show her the other side of the coin she was so afraid of, the love, the loyalty, the sense of purpose. By the time the plane began its descent into Reagan National Airport, a fragile truce had formed between us. She had stopped crying. She even managed a weak smile when I told a story about my friend and a stolen Jeep in Saigon. As the plane touched down with a gentle bump, she turned to me. "Thank you, General," she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "You didn't have to be kind to me. You've given me a little hope." "Your son will be fine, Barbara," I told her. "The Marines will make him a man. Your love will make him a good one." We deplaned together. As we walked into the terminal, I saw a young man in a crisp suit standing near the gate, holding a sign that read, "Jenner Davis." He was from the Department of Veterans Affairs, sent to escort me. I turned to say a final goodbye to Barbara, but she was looking past me, her face suddenly pale with a new kind of shock. I followed her gaze. Standing next to my escort, in a perfectly pressed Marine Corps dress blue uniform, complete with white gloves and a sword at his side, was another man. He was tall, ramrod straight, and had a face that looked like it was carved from granite. Adorning his collar were the 3 silver stars of a lieutenant general. He wasn't looking at me. His stern, unblinking eyes were fixed on Barbara. A slow, cold dread filled his expression as he took in the sight of the two of us standing together. "Barbara," the lieutenant general said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that cut through the airport noise. "What are you doing with my father?" My mind raced, connecting the dots with the speed of a battlefield assessment. Lieutenant General. Barbara. My father. The puzzle pieces slammed together with brutal clarity. This stern, 3-star Marine general was my son, Michael Jr., and the woman who had publicly humiliated me, who had mocked my service and my race, was his wife, my daughter-in-law, the mother of my grandson, Kevin, the boy who was about to follow in our footsteps. Barbara looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. All the color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll about to shatter. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She stared at Michael Jr., then at me, then back again, the horrifying realization dawning in her eyes. Dad, my son said, his voice tight with controlled fury, as he finally broke his stare from his wife to look at me. He stepped forward and wrapped me in a stiff, formal hug that was more duty than affection. I hope you had a good flight. I didn't know. Barbara was on the same one. The way he said her name was laced with ice. We hadn't seen each other in nearly a year. He and Barbara had been having problems. I knew that much from our brief, stilted phone calls. I just never knew how deep the problems ran. Michael, I said, patting his back. It's good to see you. He pulled away, his gaze immediately snapping back to his wife. Barbara, what's going on? I've been calling you. You were supposed to be here yesterday. My flight was changed, she stammered, her voice a reedy whisper. She looked at me, her eyes pleading, begging me not to reveal the ugly truth of what had happened at the gate in Philadelphia. In that moment, I had a choice. I could tell my son everything. I could describe how his wife had belittled me, questioned my honor, and thrown racist implications in my face in front of a crowd of strangers. I could detonate the landmine that would surely be the end of their already fragile marriage. The old soldier in me, the one forged in anger and retaliation, wanted to. But then I looked at her face. I saw the terror there, not just of her husband's wrath, but of the chasm she had almost opened within her own family. I thought of Kevin, her son, my grandson, about to embark on the most difficult journey of his life. He would need his mother. He would need his family to be whole, or at least not shattered by a grenade I had thrown. It was a fortunate coincidence, son, I said, stepping slightly forward, placing myself between them. The airline upgraded me, and it turned out Barbara and I were sitting together. We had a good chat. She was just telling me how proud she is of Kevin. Michael Jr.'s stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. He looked at Barbara, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Barbara stared at me, her mouth agape. The sheer, unadulterated shock on her face was profound. She had expected condemnation, and I had given her grace. Proud? Michael Jr. repeated, his tone skeptical. That's not what I've been hearing for the last 6 months. A mother has a right to be scared, I said, my voice firm, leaving no room for argument. Fear and pride can live in the same heart, son. It's a complicated piece of real estate. I held my son's gaze, and he held mine. He was a general now, but I was still his father. He saw the command in my eyes, the unspoken order to stand down. He gave a short, sharp nod. The crisis had been averted. The VA escort drove us to the hotel. The ride was thick with an uncomfortable silence. Michael Jr. sat in the front, I sat in the back, and Barbara sat beside me, as far away as the seat would allow, seemingly trying to shrink into herself. When we arrived, my son turned to me. The service is at 0900 tomorrow at Arlington. I'll pick you up at 0800. He then looked at his wife. Barbara, we'll talk at home. The words were a clear dismissal. She got out of the car without a word and disappeared into the hotel lobby. After her check-in, she must have gone straight to her room. I didn't see her again that evening. The next morning, dressed in my formal service uniform, I was waiting in the lobby when a car pulled up. It was Barbara. She was alone. She got out and opened the door for me, her expression somber and resolved. Michael was called into an urgent briefing at the Pentagon, she explained as I got in. He sent me. He said I should be the one to escort you. We drove to Arlington National Cemetery in silence. The rows upon rows of white headstones stood in stark, silent testimony to the cost of the ribbons we wear. As we walked toward the chapel, she finally stopped me. Why? She asked, her voice cracking. Why did you do that? Why did you protect me? I wasn't protecting you, Barbara, I said, looking out over the sea of graves. I was protecting my grandson. I was protecting my son. And I was protecting the memory of the man we are here to bury today. He taught me that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones you choose not to fight. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but this time it wasn't a tear of fear or shame. It was something else. Understanding, perhaps. Gratitude. After the service, after the rifle volleys had echoed and the final mournful notes of taps had faded into the Virginia sky, the three of us stood by the fresh grave. Michael Jr. stood on one side of me, Barbara on the other. My son reached out and put his hand on his wife's shoulder. She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached up and placed her hand on his. It was a small gesture, but it was a start. Looking at them, I realized that my war was over. I had spent a lifetime fighting for my country, for my brothers, for my own dignity. But that day, in the quiet, hallowed grounds of Arlington, I had fought a different kind of battle. I hadn't used a weapon or a raised voice. I had used forgiveness, and in doing so I may have just saved a family. My family.